Thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching. In this episode, we turn our focus to the S-class destroyers of World War II. A group of fast, hard-working warships that rarely made headlines, but played a critical role in convoy escort, fleet screening, and some of the most dangerous naval operations of the war. Their story starts out of necessity. The old V and W class destroyers from the First World War, once the backbone of the fleet, were worn out after years of escort duty. The brutal Battle of the Atlantic demanded modern ships with strong anti-submarine weapons, new radar, and better endurance. British shipyards were pushed to the limit. But the Navy needed destroyers that were quick to build, but still capable of fighting the most dangerous enemy in the ocean, the U-boats of the Kriegsmarine. The result was the S and T class destroyers, also called the 1943 battle-type destroyers. The S-class formed the first half of this group. Their names were simple and often sharp: Savage, Scorpion, Scourge, and many others. These names were meant to be spoken quickly by signalmen and remembered easily on radio channels filled with crackling static. Their role was not to act as a destroyer leader or to hunt capital ships. But instead, they were crafted as multi-purpose vessels that could operate in the Arctic, in the Atlantic, and anywhere Britain needed them. Most S-class destroyers were armed with 4 4.7-inch guns, each in its own single mounting. Anti-aircraft guns, including Bofors and Oerlikons, which were essential against low-flying aircraft. They also carried torpedoes, with a set of 8 21-inch tubes. Depth charges and hedgehog mortars, the soul of their anti-submarine power. Modern radar and sonar, which gave them an edge in convoy battles where visibility often dropped to zero. They were around 1,700 tons, with speeds of up to 36 knots, though most of their wartime operations were spent crawling through storms, ice, and freezing spray at much lower speeds. They were recognizable by their single funnel, a tall mast, and a low silhouette that made them harder to spot in rough seas. They were much tougher than their predecessors, with stronger hulls that could handle Arctic ice and the violent slamming of North Atlantic waves. But perhaps their greatest strength, however, was their crews. These destroyers were manned by sailors that often braved some of the worst naval conditions on the planet. Men who fought not only German U-boats and aircraft, but also nature itself. They protected convoys bound for the Soviet Union, convoys that the Germans considered extremely important targets. The waters north of Norway were extremely dangerous, filled with submarines, aircraft, and German surface raiders. The weather was often worse than the enemy, and the waves could rise as tall as buildings and freeze instantly on deck rails, forming thick white armor that made ships top-heavy. The cold seeped through gloves, coats, and steel decks. This made every movement slower and painful. This is why the S-class ships gained their reputations for endurance. Their solid construction and updated machinery allowed them to remain with the convoys even after long storms that would have forced older ships to turn back. One S-class officer later wrote in his journal, "These ships take punishment like nothing else. The men too. We are all cold, wet, exhausted beyond measure, but we stay with the convoy. The convoy must reach Russia." With every passing month, the S-class destroyers earned more experience. They escorted troopships to France after D-Day. They patrolled the English Channel. They hunted more U-boats before the closing months of the war, when desperate German submarines still tried to slip out of their fortified bases. But among all the ships of the S-class, one stood out. One earned more recognition than any of her sisters. One became a name etched deep into the history of the Second World War. Her name was HMS Savage, and she was the most honored of the S-class. Savage was launched in 1942 and commissioned in 1943. She was a hard-working destroyer, built with one purpose above all others, to escort and to fight. But Savage became famous on a single day. A single battle. A single moment when the Royal Navy crossed paths with one of the most dangerous ships in the world. The date was the 26th of December, 1943. The battle was the Battle of the North Cape. Her target was the German battlecruiser Scharnhorst, the terror of the North Atlantic, pronounced Scharnhorst. Savage was part of the destroyer screen for HMS Duke of York and several cruisers. The British force had been sent to intercept Scharnhorst, which was attempting to attack Arctic convoys heading to Russia. Her main guns could wipe out destroyers with a single hit. But the British had one advantage: radar. Savage, along with the destroyers Saumarez, Scorpion, and Stord, was ordered to close the distance and attack Scharnhorst with torpedoes. It was one of the most dangerous tasks a destroyer could ever face. To charge a battleship in a storm, at night, with only brief radar glances to guide them. Savage pressed in at high speed, closing to less than 6,000 yards. A heartbeat at sea. A moment where one shell could erase the ship from existence. But Savage did not hesitate. She launched her torpedoes and then turned hard, escaping behind a curtain of spray and smoke. Her torpedoes were part of the combined attack that crippled Scharnhorst and helped slow the German giant enough for the battleship Duke of York to finish her. The British destroyers, small and fragile compared to a ship like Scharnhorst, had played a decisive role in one of the Royal Navy's greatest victories of the war. For her part in the battle, HMS Savage received the Battle Honour, North Cape 1943. This single event made Savage the most honoured and most famous ship of the S-class. After the war, when Germany surrendered in May 1945, the S-class destroyers began new lives in a world that was struggling to rebuild. Some were scrapped fairly early. Others served into the 1950s and 1960s. A few were transferred to foreign navies, helping nations rebuild their fleets after the war. They sailed in distant oceans, far from the icy battles they were designed for. They were workhorses. Escort ships. Convoy guardians, quiet, determined and dependable. They protected the lifelines that kept Britain in the war. Without ships like the S-class, the convoys might have fallen to the U-boats. And if the convoys had failed, Britain might have fallen too. So their legacy is not in grand battles or famous duels. It is in the thousands of merchant sailors who survived, because a S-class destroyer was nearby. It is in the countless supply runs to Murmansk and Archangel. It is in the quiet pride of being built for a simple purpose and performing that purpose with excellence. And at the front of the line stands HMS Savage, the destroyer that helped bring down Scharnhorst. A ship that proved, once again, that courage and determination could make even a small destroyer a giant on the sea. A simple ship, built for a simple mission. But a legend all the same. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.